Hello everyone and welcome back to another Wizard101 video. Today, we are going to be ranking the worlds by difficulty. Now, if you don't know, I love ranking things, and I've done that a lot on my channel, and you guys tend to like watching me rank things as well. And I have ranked the worlds by difficulty before in the past. However, obviously, things change over time. Like the worlds can change, or, like how I think about the game can change, the metas can change ever so slightly. You get the point. Also, there's a lot of new people playing Wiz right now, and a lot of newer players might want to know how difficult is every world? Which worlds are going to give me the most amount of trouble, and which ones am I going to struggle with more than others? So today I thought I would rank all of the worlds by difficulty. But before I get into that, let me say two things. First off, this list is all relative, so obviously it can be easier or more difficult depending on like what gear you farm, or if you have a good pet, or if you get monstrous TC at the beginning of the game. It can make things significantly easier for you. So this list is applicable at all areas because it's a relative list. So, like the world that's the hardest is always going to be probably harder than the second hardest, despite changing gear sets, whatever, depending on you, the player. The second thing I'd like to point out is that while I'm ranking by difficulty, realistically, Wizard101 is not a difficult game. You can get through the game, maybe not solo through most of it, like Arc 3 and Arc 4 are going to be much harder to solo, but you can solo through the first two arcs and most of Arc 3 and 4. Some fights are going to require other people with you, but if you have two people questing through the game, you can very easily get through the entire game and not have any difficulties. So this tier list is more just like a thought exercise on like how difficult each world is just at a base level. You might struggle with some worlds more than others, and you might not struggle at all. So without further ado, let's get into it. Starting off with Wizard City. Wizard City is the first world in the game. It's not meant to be difficult. It's meant to introduce you to the game. It's meant to show you what the game can be and what to expect from the coming worlds. However, I will say Wizard City, out of every world, is probably the world I have died the most in. And that may sound funny, but I think it's true because personally, without gear and without like having any stats, I find that I tend to die significantly more in this world than I do in literally any other because I only have that baseline stats. I find that like a lot of times a boss will use their damage per pip spell, like they have all spells that work almost exactly like Tempest, like 100 damage per pips. It's called their natural attack, and that natural attack tends to be a killer. On my death and my death playthrough, I died like 3-4 times to Bastilla Gravewind because she kept spamming that natural attack and doing like 400 damage to me. So I will say, I think Wizard City is harder than a lot of other worlds on this tier list, just purely based on that and like relatively what level it is. However, obviously it's not nearly as difficult as some later worlds. I would put it in a C tier. It's like one of those things where you do die a lot if you're unlucky or if you're weak, but generally it's not going to be that difficult. You can get through the entire world really easily in like an hour and a half if you try. Next up we have Croc, and Croc is interesting because I don't think it's as hard as Wizard City. I think it is pretty easy generally, relatively. However, it does offer like a little bit of difficulty, but with the stats you get on more gear and like with the potential of even farming gear if you do a lot of side quests, it's not that difficult of a world, and it can't be higher than like a D tier because I just find that while I die in Wizard City, I don't think I've ever died in Croc, or if I have, it's only been once or twice. It's not that difficult. It's probably slightly less than Wizard City. Next up is Wisteria, and Wisteria is interesting because at level 25 when you do it, it has some really hard fights, but it has a lot of really easy fights. So I'm going to put it in the C tier, but let me explain my reasoning. The 1v1 fights in the tournament itself are incredibly easy. The enemies there don't have minions, which makes the fight significantly easier because you can just use a single target spell and easily take them out. At most, I think they have like 800 health. So they're not difficult, and the tournament section is actually ridiculously easy. However, Wisteria also has things like the Chester Drawers fight and the Lord Graustark fight at the beginning, and both of those are actually quite difficult. Lord Graustark, because he has 1400 health, which for a boss that's like Mushu levels of health in Wisteria at level 25, which can be difficult. And the Chester Drawers fight is a 1v3, which does tend to be difficult, and he does have cheats. So generally, I would say that Wisteria actually has some harder fights for level 25 as well. And don't even get me started on the fact that as a Death Wizard, they're going to be spamming shield and you might be struggling a bit more than you'd like. Next up, we have Marleybone, and Marleybone's kind of a difficult one to rank because similarly to Wizard City and Wisteria is there are difficult parts of it, like Big Ben is going to be a struggle. However, I don't think it's generally as hard or you can die as much as these two worlds. And Marleybone's only like maybe 2.5 hours long, and because of that, it doesn't feel very difficult. It's a very fast world, and this world's probably going to be when you get some Mount Olympus gear at this point in the game, which is going to be incredibly useful. Like, the Skyrim Hasta itself is going to boost your ability to do damage quite a bit. That 10% really goes a long way. It might not feel like it, but it definitely goes a long way in fights. Next up, we have Mushu, and Mushu is where things start getting a little bit harder, to the point where I'm going to move it up to C tier. Mushu has some difficult fights in it, and some fights that might genuinely challenge you. Like, there are some solo fights like Tamagawa the Evil in the Ancient Burial Grounds, and obviously the Jade Oni at the end, the final Jade Oni fight, has like 5,800 health, I think now. Really, that is quite challenging. That is quite a boost of HP compared to literally anything else you fought up until that point, and that does tend to make Mushu a little bit more challenging. But the counter to that, and the reason why it's not higher than that, is the fact that at this point you probably have Zeus gear, and Zeus gear at the very least is going to boost your damage up to the 40 to 50 range, and 40 to 50% damage is going to be so good for this point in the game. You're going to be breezing through most encounters. Like, my death doesn't have any problems with any encounters in Mushu, and he probably won't in Dragonspire either, spoiler alert. So I would put Mushu at C tier. And next up, we finally are going to have our first slightly more challenging world in Dragonspire. Dragonspire has some genuinely difficult fights in it, not to the point where I would rank it higher than a B tier, but there are some challenges where, like, there is, I forget their names, but like Sandor Spellcaster, I think, and those fights, Mavra Flamewing, is that their names? I don't know if I'm remembering them correctly, but they do spam like blades and weaknesses, and they have the moat kind of minions, which do tend to be a bit more challenging. Like, one of them spams weaknesses, one of them spams shields, which is a bit annoying. And then that's not even talking about the fact that Malastare has like 8,000 health, which is quite a bit. And there's a significant amount of towers in Dragonspire, and the enemies do get a bit tougher. So I would put it into B tier. The reason why it's not higher is that if you have a good set of gear, like a gear set that gives you 50% damage, you're not going to be having that many issues, especially if you get at this point, like if you reach level 50 and get Jewel to Faint, easily you can get through Dragonspire. But even then, just with a regular Faint, you're not going to be having that many issues. Next up, we have our first really difficult world, and that is going to be Grizzleheim and Wintertusk. I'm lumping these together, and because of that, I'm putting them into S tier. Now, the reason why this is so difficult is that the first 3 areas of Grizzleheim aren't the worst. They aren't that hard. They're for levels 20, 25, and 30, so they're not like anything particularly challenging, and realistically, the first like bit of Grizzleheim is probably like a C or a D tier. It's not that hard. Then you get to the fight against, I believe, Jotun it is, which is a fight against 3 bosses and a minion, I believe, which have quite a bit of health each, which is quite difficult. Then you get to Ravenscar, which is genuinely difficult. There's a solo fight against like a 6,000 health enemy, which is really rough for like the level 40 or so that most people do this at. And that's not even mentioning the fact that the like final Coven fight is a 4 fight of like 3,000 health bosses each. Ravenscar is quite difficult to the point where it would probably be A tier. However, we're including Wintertusk in this. The level that most people do it at, like level 40, into one of the hardest worlds for level in the game. Enemies have cheats, all the bosses have like 6,000 to 7,000 health, and it is genuinely a massive difficulty spike. If we're talking about difficulty now, Wintertusk is probably on the level of Zafaria, I would say. So you're doing like a level 60 to 70 world at level 40 most of the time, and that does tend to be quite difficult. Wintertusk has always been notorious for being difficult, and that's not even counting the fact that, you know, Nastrond is a very long and difficult dungeon. A bunch of enemies are ice and they spam tower shields, which is going to be annoying. It's definitely a rough world. It's probably one of, as I said, one of the hardest for your level worlds in the entire game, and I don't know how many worlds are going to even approach Wintertusk. That is the kind of difficulty ranking on it. Next up, we have Celestia, and it's funny because Celestia used to actually be quite a bit more difficult. I would say it used to be an A or a B tier. A tier would be like if you didn't do Wintertusk. B tier would be if you did Wintertusk first. However, Celestia is not that difficult nowadays. With the 20% health reduction update that they did like a few years ago, and then just generally like power creep in this game, Celestia, you're getting through it pretty easily. If you manage to get to level 60 pre-Celestia or even during earlier Celestia and you get Waterworks gear, that's not even mentioning like Atavistic, Zigzag, other gear sets that you can get around this level, you're gonna breeze through it. Celestia, honestly, nowadays, I would probably put it a C tier. It's genuinely not difficult. If you just faint and then 7-pip AoE, you're gonna get through most bosses really easily. And unfortunately, I think Zafaria might even be a little lower. Actually, do I want to even rank Celestia Celestia. Yeah, I'll rank Celestia C. I'm thinking I'm going to rank Safari at D tier. And the reason is you're definitely level 60 at this point. And once you get Waterworks gear, your power spikes to the point where you are much, much stronger than most enemies in the world you're at. For example, Safaria, the highest health enemy has like 5,000 to 6,000 health. If you just faint, especially if you double faint with Jewel of the Faint, and then you have like 100% damage, you're going to be breezing through the game. And at this point, you have enchants like Colossal, potentially Gargantuan if you haven't got Colossal yet. It's just going to be easy. I think Safari is genuinely an easy world, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it makes the world even feel a little bit better. Like it feels nice to go through the beginning of Arc 2 because it does feel a little bit easy, which like I don't think it's too easy, but it's a little bit on the easier side. Okay, now we're getting to the point where things are starting to get a little bit difficult. Starting with Avalon, and Avalon is probably an A or a B tier world. I think I'm going to put it into B tier. It used to be A before the 20% health reduction, but enemies start at this point having like 10 to 12,000 health, which is quite a bit. You're going to probably need double faint to be able to get through this world decently easily. And this is where I would say Waterworks gear starts getting outclassed, but you don't really get any new gear to compensate for that. There's not really any level 70 to 90 gear sets in this game. Generally, most people just go from the level 60 gear set of Waterworks straight up to Darkmoor at level 100. Obviously, there are like the Atlantia and Tartarus sets, but they're not good enough to be worth farming. So it does make these later Arc 2 worlds feel genuinely difficult because they do tend to be a little bit stronger than you'd expect. Now, Avalon has nothing on the next world, which is Azteca, which is going to be our second S tier. If there's any worlds in this game that are an S tier, Wintertusk and Azteca are going to be them just because of how difficult they are for the level. Azteca isn't as difficult as it used to be because of the 20% health reduction that I keep mentioning, but there is a few things that do tend to make it a difficult world. For example, every enemy starts with a massive amount of pips. I'm talking storm bosses that start with 12 pips and are going to storm owl you first round, crit, and do like 4,000 damage. That is genuinely how difficult Azteca can be. There are some fights that are just over right from the start. If you don't have like a healer or something, it's going to be a rough time. At this point, you need double faint, and if you get Potent Trap, you can triple faint, which is useful and obviously going to be really good, but that doesn't mean that it's going to be easy. Azteca is also long, it's a slog. At this point, your gear is definitely outdated because if you're still using Waterworks, it feels like you're still using Waterworks, and it's just genuinely a rough time. I think Azteca is probably a good example of like when the power creep at this point didn't really match up with the power creep of the worlds, and it wasn't until later on when we would start getting like much more powerful gear that the world started getting easier again. So Azteca is probably an S tier, and I think that most people would probably agree with that. Next up, we have Aquila, and Aquila is probably also going to be an S tier. If you don't have a max level carrying you through these dungeons, they are genuinely the most difficult dungeons for the levels that you're supposed to do them at. Now, obviously, they used to have level cap on them, like it would be 30, 70, 90. Now they don't have the level cap on them. I think you need to beat certain worlds. Like I think you need to beat Zafaria before you unlock Atlantia. I could be wrong about that. They might have removed that. Besides that, the point is they are very difficult for when you do them, and Tartarus is probably one of the most difficult dungeons in the game for the level because again, everyone has Waterworks gear at this point, and you're fighting enemies that have like 20,000 health. The Cerberus boss has pretty annoying cheats. It's going to be a bit rough. I think genuinely Aquila is, in my opinion, the peak design of this is a very difficult world and area, but it's not frustratingly difficult, which we're going to get into what I think is frustratingly difficult later on. Next up, we have Khrysalis, and Khrysalis is going to be an A tier, and the reason is that at this point in the game, you're probably reaching level 100 about halfway to 3/4 the way through Khrysalis, and once you reach level 100, you're going to be having a much, much easier time than you currently are having. Khrysalis Part 1, which is the first half of it, is genuinely probably as bad as Azteca. The enemies are difficult, it's very long, there's a lot of quests, a lot of walking, and it's genuinely unfun. However, Part 2 of Khrysalis is much better because you hit the power spike at level 100. The areas are much shorter, maybe not much shorter, but they are shorter, and it's genuinely a more fun experience. So that's why Khrysalis isn't an S tier. I would say if it wasn't for Darkmoor gear, like if you're just going in with Waterworks still, it's obviously an S tier. Next up, we have the 4 dungeons, and these are probably also going to be an S tier. It's kind of funny how the video started out with just everything down here, and now everything is up here. The 4 dungeons are quite a bit difficult for the levels they're at. Keemalung Village isn't anything to talk about, but Barkingham Palace, the enemies have like 6,000 health, which at level 40 is quite a bit more than you'd expect. These are like probably Wintertusk level enemies, or at the very least like Celestia level enemies, and you're fighting them at level 40, which is quite difficult. Zigzag is also quite difficult. It's like more difficult than Zafaria. I wouldn't put it on Avalon levels, but it's a little difficult. And then obviously Darkmoor is probably one of the most difficult dungeons in the the game for the level. Obviously, we have the strategies and we know how to do it completely optimally compared to what we used to, because it was genuinely a lot more difficult back in the day. Now that we kind of have it down, it's not as much, but for a new player who doesn't know anything about it, Darkmoor is very, very difficult. Malistaire isn't even easy like at max level still. I mean, he's easy, but he's not like as easy as you'd expect for something that is 70 levels prior to where you are at the end of the game. I'm gonna rank the 4 dungeons overall S tier. I think they could go down into A tier, but it genuinely depends on how easy your Darkmoor experience is, because Darkmoor is like an S tier in of itself. Next up we have Polaris, and Polaris is fun because I would put it at B tier. Difficulty drops quite a bit off from Khrysalis to Polaris, and the reason is that they moved the enemy's health all the way down to like 8,000, which is really, really good compared to like the 20,000 that Khrysalis had, or like the 18 and 20,000 they had. However, to compensate for that, they made some bosses have much more difficult cheats, and there are some very difficult fights in Polaris. Like Baba Yaga is a difficult fight. We have the rat at the end, which can be quite a difficult fight as well if you don't know what you're doing. There are difficult fights, but overall it's an easier experience, which is why it's in B tier. I would say that that's pretty fair for what you're getting. It's not the most difficult in the world, but for starting off Arc 3, it's pretty fun, which is good. It makes the difficulty feel less painful because it is fun. Next up, the Arcanum's on here. As always, it's not really a world. It's just kind of a hub area. There are some fights in the Arcanum, but not enough that it deserves to be anywhere other than the easiest technical world in the game. Moving on, let's talk about Mirage. Mirage is one of my favorite worlds in this game, and it does have some difficult fights. I don't think it's as difficult as a Khrysalis maybe. I would probably also put it into B tier. There are some difficult fights though, like the final section where you have to fight like the Shadow Walk and I don't remember, Bort Shadowmane I think is his name, and then finally Grandfather Spider. It is a difficult like final few quests, and there are some other fights throughout that are like quite a bit difficult. I think B tier is fair for it. It's not like as challenging as Khrysalis, I would say, because again, you are like level 100 to 120. Generally your stats are going to be pretty good at this level of the game, and you're not going to be struggling that much. Next up we have Imperial, which I think I'm going to put into A tier. It is quite a bit more difficult than Polaris and Mirage, and there are some really difficult fights, like the Trident fight at the end. It is a hard fight. There's also the fight where you're fighting the rat and the scorpion at the same time, which can be annoying. Imperial is quite a bit hard. It's a final world of an arc, which do tend to be quite a bit hard, but I don't think it's anything like outstandingly hard compared to the S tier worlds. Like you can get through it pretty easily, and at this point in the game you're starting to get better gear as well. Your damage is increasing. You're doing decent. Next up we have the Catacombs, and I'm gonna flat out say the Catacombs is the most difficult and frustrating thing in this entire game. KingsIsle made this to be a challenge. The bosses all have a very unique set of cheats, and let me tell you, this is like the worst that KingsIsle has ever been when it's come to like, let's make a cheating boss that is the worst. And I think genuinely because of that, I never want to do any of the Catacombs ever again. I'm going to be skipping it on literally all future Wizards because it's just unfun. Like some of these other S tier worlds in terms of difficulty, like Winter Tusk and like some of the Aquila areas, hell, even some of Azteca, I find fun. There is not a single aspect of the Catacombs that I find fun. So it's going into S tier, and it's going into S tier with shame. This is like the most difficult thing that you never want to do compared to all the other most difficult things that are like genuinely fun and interesting aspects of the game. The Catacombs sucks, dude. Nobody knows what they're doing. All the fights have just the most arbitrary and annoying cheats. Don't even get me started on things like the Devourer. It's like you're not gonna have fun, and at this point farming for Dragoon gear is like basically not worth it anyway for the Catacombs. So it's kind of like, why would you do this? It's just torture. It's literally torture. Next up we have Caramel, and Caramel is probably an A tier world. While a lot of the mob fights are easy and there are some easy boss fights, it does also have some very difficult boss fights. Like there are some boss fights that you're going to not have a good time with. Like for example, there's the Bundozer, which is quite a difficult fight. There is Judge Veg, which I know is a fight that a lot of people hated and remember like with shaking their fist at it. And then there's the, what are they called, the Oogie Boogies, the Gobbler King Gobblestone's castle thing, and you have to fight those like snot monsters, which is a little gross now that I'm thinking about it, but that fight's also quite difficult if you don't know how to deal with the cheats. So Caramel's a pretty fair A tier, and then there's also the Aberrant Paradox at the end now that I'm thinking about it, and that is also quite a difficult fight. So Caramel's, it's a solidly difficult world, and I think that overall it's not that difficult. You can probably get through it pretty fast, but the cheating bosses do cheat, and they do cheat pretty hard. Next up we have Lemuria, and Lemuria, I don't really remember the most difficult fights, to be honest. I know that there's some difficult fights, but I think like the final fight was made quite a bit easier. I feel like I want to put it in a B tier. Like that's my instinct of Lemuria. I could be forgetting a very difficult and annoying fight, but as far as I can think of off the top of my head, I can't think of any fight that is like incredibly difficult that I remember being frustratingly difficult. Caramel has those fights that I listed, but I don't think Lemuria has anything that I could think of off the top of my head that's like, oh, this is a difficult fight. Someone let me know. Let me know in the comments, is there a difficult fight in Lemuria that I'm missing? Otherwise, I think that it's just a B tier. It's like, it is difficult, but I wouldn't put it on the level of like A tier difficult. I don't think it's that bad. Next up, we have Novus, and I think Novus is interesting because I don't think it's as difficult as some of these A tier worlds. There are fights that you would put up there, but they're not so much difficult as they are frustrating. Like all of the fights that you can farm Aeon gear from are annoying, but they're not like difficult in any way, right? Like if I'm thinking of like the Aeon of Atavis, that fight isn't difficult. It's just long and drawn out and takes like 30 minutes to do. If I'm thinking of like Design Duelist, or I could go through all the bosses, Maxine Rock Javier, those bosses, they're not difficult. They're just like annoying. I don't know. I would probably put it in a B tier. It's one of those worlds where the cheats aren't genuinely challenging and you're probably not going to die that much, but it is going to be annoying to figure out the cheats. So I'm going to put it in a B tier, and I think that's fair. Next up, and finally, we have Wallaroo. And Wallaroo, I'm going to probably put in the A tier because it does have some genuinely difficult fights. Actually, I almost want to put it in the S tier because of Malice. Malice technically counts, right? But it's also like technically not a main quest. Like you don't have to do it, I don't think, to progress with the world. I'll put it in A tier because of that, but with Malice, it's probably an S tier. Wallaroo has some difficult fights. Like the Urk fights that you have to solo are genuinely quite annoying. Some of them do take a long time, and some of them you will die and probably even fail once or twice. Like I definitely did on at least one Urk boss. I don't remember what their names are, but like I remember the ice one I really hated, and I think that because of that, it's an A tier. There are some difficult fights as well throughout. Most of the final fights are kind of cutscene fights, but like I think Freddy Croker, I remember being a difficult fight as well. So I'm going to put it in A tier, and I think that that's fair. I don't think it's any S tier world besides if you count Malice. So that's going to be it for this video, I think. This is my ranking of the worlds. Let me zoom in a little bit so you can see them in their full. I think that this is a fair summation. Generally, if you're looking at this, Arc 1 is like towards the bottom, which makes sense, and then Arc 2 is towards the top, and then Arc 4 is a little bit slightly skewed towards the top, and then Arc 3 is probably just like kind of in the middle of the road if I'm looking at it. So that's it for today. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you think that these are fair rankings? Do you think that I underestimated or even overestimated the difficulty of a world? What do you guys think? You know, let me know if this was helpful in some way. If you're like a new to the game and you wanted to know what the difficulty was, let me know. You know, like did you find this helpful? Otherwise, that's it for today. If you enjoyed, make sure to drop a like at the sub button. Thank you all for the support recently, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Have a fantastic day.